Hey everyone, it's Erin with Hail Varsity. I am joined by Greg, recruiting extraordinaire, also of Hail Varsity, and we are back one day late. Not kind of intentionally. It's a long story. We won't bore you with the details, but we are back with the recruiting question of the week. Greg, how are you?
I'm well, trying to figure out where I am in this week. There's just a lot going on, and that week between Christmas and New Year's where it's busy for everyone, right?
It is, but it's like also not at the same. It is, but it
Yeah,
isn't.
yeah.
It's such a strange week for so many because, like, a lot of you, if you're maybe you have the time off, maybe you're working from home, maybe you still have family in town for the holidays. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a
It's
lot, but there isn't. That's a good way to
Yeah, so
put it.
it's a strange week. So we are here to give you a little bit of a distraction from everything else going on with some recruiting talk. So this week's question comes from fullback trap, which I know a lot of people love a good fullback, but the question isn't about fullbacks.
No.
He asked Greg, what needs to happen with the offensive line in the portal from a success standpoint next season, and how could that influence other transfers at the skill positions with quarterback? So, all right, offensive line, portal, success. There's a lot in here. Let's
There
dive in.
is. Yeah, I have found this really interesting for various reasons. One, I think that it's a good line of thinking that I think that all of this is related, right? I don't think that guys are necessarily making these decisions to join Nebraska or not in the transfer portal just like on their own without looking at the totality of like Nebraska's offense in particular, in like in this case. And mostly the transfers are going to be on offense, right? With a few exceptions at defensive back. And so I do think that Nebraska needs to continue to add guys on the offensive line to continue to show a quarterback that, hey, we're making strides and improvements at the position that we were weakest at last year. I do think that it would be reasonable to expect that any quarterback that Nebraska is talking to about joining the team via the transfer portal has asked the coaching staff, Scott Frost and Mark Whipple, namely, hey, what's happening with the offensive line? Like Nebraska's offensive line last year took a couple of step back from where we thought they were going to be. They've already added one guy in the transfer portal, and Kevin Williams Jr. has come over on scholarship. I still suspect they'll add a couple of more as well. So I think that part of it is really interconnected. And I think the success of landing offensive linemen definitely goes into obviously what's going to happen with the season next year.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line, it's going to be really interesting because one of the things that has kind of come up in the last week and a half is bowl games have shifted and had to change due to, I will say, yes, COVID issues for a number of teams, but also there's so many, there's been a number of opt-outs, players who have decided to declare early for the NFL draft, or who have decided that they're going to transfer, so they're no longer technically with their teams. So for a lot of reasons, bowl games have shifted a bit. And of course, people are like, oh, Nebraska should take one of those spots in one of these bowl games. But the interesting thing is then it becomes the question of who would be available at a certain spot. And this offensive line really became, it was already a concern in 2021, but now you're looking at positions on that offensive line that really don't have much, like the depth is there, but like the experience is not. So when you're looking at that portal, who are you going to bring in? Who are you going to go get? Because like you said, that's so important for a quarterback who you might be trying to sell something to, where you're like, hey, you want to come here? Who's protecting you? So I think that offensive line is super valuable. And it's just the reason I bring up the bowl games is because that was a conversation that kept coming up when people were like, oh, like who's playing on the offensive line for Nebraska right
Right.
now? So clearly the offensive line is a big key in this. I'm not saying anything any of you don't know, but it is a huge key in the success of really the rest of this offense. What the quarterback looks like, what are you going to get from your running backs?
Mhm.
What kind of space are you going to be able to create for them to run? What are you going to be able to do and create for your tight ends and your wide receivers? Like the offensive line, it really, like, they're crucial to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that going forward, like I think that it's so much, and it's really interesting because quarterback has gotten so much attention this offseason, and it will continue to, and rightfully so. I know we all want to talk about the quarterbacks and who's going to potentially come here. Like
Quarterback chat.
it comes up all the time, right? Like even when in jest, like people are like, "Hey, I think you put out the call for questions. You're just going to get quarterback questions." It continues to come up, but I think that the thing that's going to happen as we get like into spring football and then we get closer to next season, the thing that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about is what happened on kind of this retooled offensive line. Like I think that that's going to be a huge storyline moving forward, and obviously it starts now with what they're doing with the transfer portal because it's kind of like it's obvious that they're going to get a quarterback in the transfer portal. I think it's kind of obvious that they're going to continue adding offensive linemen in the transfer portal, if for no other reason than to continue to add depth and to make good, healthy competition on that offensive line, so that essentially when you go into spring football this year, no one should really feel like they have a guaranteed spot on Nebraska's offensive line.
It's going to be interesting. This is going to be one to watch just to see, because obviously with any kind of line position, you do want to recruit. And we kind of talked about this in our previous video, the difference between high school recruiting and transfer portal, and how a lot of people feel that the transfer portal is going to sort of just make high school recruiting less important. We even saw people respond to our video saying it
Yeah.
already has made high school recruiting less important. And I don't necessarily agree in the sense that I do think you have to keep building that depth, but especially with your lines, both defense and
Yeah.
offense, you don't bring a whole lot of players in that are ready to start right away at 18. When
Right.
they usually need a little bit more time to develop, and so when you're looking at needing to fill some roles that have been taken for a few years by key players, the portal was a place to go. And so it's going to be really interesting to sort of watch this evolve. One, as we get closer to that February signing date and kind of see what Nebraska is looking at, if there's potentially anyone else,
Mhm.
offensive line, high school recruits that might surface between now and then, or if the transfer portal, like what that is going to look like. I think it's going to have to be two folds, but it's definitely an area where Nebraska is going to need continued help, depth, you name it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think that that's going to be something, like we said, worth watching moving forward. And then because I think that you have, I think the pieces to sell a potential quarterback at wide receiver, and even at running back. But even if you're selling the running back situation at Nebraska, it's hard to do that without saying, well, hey, who's opening up those holes, right? Because you don't even feel like you have a great grasp of what Nebraska's running backs can do because they had such a tough time finding running lanes last year. Like it's all very much connected to that offensive line.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Donovan Raiola is able to do with this group. I was just telling Greg, you missed this. I cut it out. I keep switching Dominic and Donovan's names. My apologies. It's going to take a little bit. When you're so used to one person's name
Right.
being in Nebraska history, it takes a little bit of time to adjust those two names. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does, what he kind of sees, maybe what he sees within the offensive line room that we don't see right now, or maybe he makes some shifts, some adjustments. Again, it's going to be interesting to watch. I definitely think the portal will play a role and definitely, uh, ultimately decide other areas like we were just talking about. So I don't know. It'll be fun, maybe fun. It depends on your
Maybe.
idea of fun.
Yeah, I would say yeah. It depends on your idea of fun. It depends on how successful they are in bringing guys in, and hopefully quickly, so that people don't have as much angst about what's happening.
Very true. Well, if you want more on this topic, you can head to hailvarsity.com tonight for the recruiting notebook, 6 p.m. Central. The recruiting notebook goes live 6 p.m. Central, Sunday through Thursday. Obviously, holidays do sometimes factor into that. So just a heads up as we go through the next couple of weeks. But it's one of those things where if you want a deeper dive on recruiting topics, want to know kind of what's going on, Greg actually discussed one of your recent questions in his previous notebook that wasn't a video, but was just something that you had asked and talked about. So it came up in a recruiting notebook. So you should definitely bookmark those now, and also subscribe to Hail Varsity. We would love to have you. You can go get the subscribe link right now at hailvarsity.com. Follow Greg, send him your questions at Greg Smith HV. You can tweet at Hail Varsity as well, at Hail Varsity. We just appreciate you as always. We hope you have a really good, strange week, whatever this is. And we will be back. I may not be back with Greg for a couple of weeks, but he will certainly be back. And we'll keep taking your recruiting questions. So send them our way. Greg, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you for your expertise.
Yeah, thank you. Happy New Year, everybody.